one of the corners of the ancient Egyptian museum, where contains a lot of archaeological treasures of the ancient Egyptian civilization, which makes you stand in front of it helpless to express the growing feeling inside you whenever you pass between all those glass boxes, which perhaps in your imagination contain a curse from the curses of the ancient pharaohs that you fear. If one of them befalls you, you feel reverence and respect for the greats who left behind them a civilization that is still full of secrets, legends, and mysteries. Everyone is looking for the Hall of Mummies, including the great kings lying inside those glass boxes in silence. From time to time we hear the screams that resound in that hall, so we almost die in fear of that, as if we were inside a fictional American movie where the soul came again in one of those mummies. All of this passes before our imagination in a few seconds. But we remember that they are just dead. Nothing more than that. Those screams always come from some women or children who come near one of those glass boxes on the outskirts of the hall. There we find a mummy imprisoned between the unidentified glass walls. No one dared to mention who that mummy was. At first, no one knew anything about her except that she was the only mummy. Covered with a white cloth, where terror and terror spread in the hearts of those who saw it at first glance. It is a unique mummy in its kind that differs greatly from the rest of the mummies that were discovered until that moment. Perhaps the reason for this is the signs of terror and terror that were accurately drawn on the divisions of that face and the mouth wide open, as if it was the last cry in the life of the owner of that mummy 2,000 years ago, contrary to all the generalities that inhabit the museum in deathly stillness. Everyone who stands in front of it is delusional that he hears those cries that echo from the depths of history. It is the mummy of a young man between the ages of 18 and 25. Legends and curses always hover around her, as if there is a curse that haunts her to this day. So she screams between the walls of the museum to fill its echo all the time. But I wonder why all the mummies lie in silence except for those whose feelings of terror and fear are still depicted on the features of this mummified face. And who is that mummy, which some called the screaming mummy? And what is the curse that befell this young man? In 1886, this mummy was discovered by the scientist Maspero among a large group of royal mummies in one cache, but it drew attention strongly by what distinguished it from all other royal mummies that were crowding the place. The strange thing is that this mummy was lying in an unusually undistinguished wooden coffin, which indicates at first that it is not for anyone from the royal family and maybe for a person from the general public. But the question that came to the mind of the scientist Maspero at the time: why does that coffin lie among all those royal mummies? And who brought them to be among all those distinguished royal mummies? Maspero realized at the time that he was facing a new mystery from the mysteries of the ancestors, and perhaps he was facing a great discovery. Maspero hastened to try to decipher this mystery by examining that sarcophagus, and he did not find a name written on it, as was the custom of the pharaohs, for the soul wandering in the other world to be guided to its body, so that life would come into it again. But this will not happen with that mummy, as if the priests had deliberately done so that the curse would hit the soul of this young man, so that it would remain wandering forever and not inhabit her body again. All of this aroused Maspero's curiosity and passion to examine that unknown mummy accurately, which filled everyone's hearts with terror from the first moment when they found the features of the face whose owner had died screaming from panic and pain. So he may have been embalmed while he was still alive as a punishment for his crime, but what is this crime? What did that young man do? Maspero was sure that all phenomena indicate that this young man was embalmed in a very strange way, so the skull was not opened to extract the brain, and the viscera were not extracted from the abdomen, which is subject to rot, and were not placed in canopic vessels as usual, and the color of the mummy tends to be dark red, so perhaps this indicates that this young man was embalmed while he was alive. No mummy's face before with such accuracy expressed the terror that accompanied the recent death tendencies. The shrunken facial expressions of horror almost certainly indicate that the poor man had died of suffocation because he was buried alive and his body was wrapped in goatskin, even though the ancient Egyptian was looking at him. As an inappropriate material, goats were also considered hostile to the sun god Ra, and it seemed as if he was forced to die by poison. It is also possible that a court decision was issued to embalm him while he was in his last dying moments before the soul left the body as a punishment. At first, Maspero was confused as to who this mummy belonged to, especially since there are no inscriptions indicating its owner. Some scholars thought that this mummy might belong to a Hittite prince who was captured and fulfilled inside Egypt, so the priests decided to deal with his soul with some insult, according to the religious beliefs that were prevalent at the time. But that theory did not find support with anything tangible or proof of that, because the sarcophagus of that mummy was found next to the sarcophagus of King Thutmose I and King Ramses II, and these are great kings, and this confirms that he is from the royal family without a doubt. But what did this young man do to be embalmed in this way, the hideous, which was not repeated in the pharaonic history? This mystery remained mysterious, and no one was able to decipher its secrets. But when the Turin papyrus was revealed, which was telling the details of the conspiracy that was called the Harem Conspiracy and the attempt to assassinate Ramesses III, the names and titles of the accused were mentioned except for the title of the conspiring prince, where he was called the Great Criminal, and this is considered a disgraceful matter.
He detracts from his royal status, despite the severity of his crime against his father. The papyrus showed the details of the trial, which was considered the first coup against the legitimacy of the king recorded in history, in which many participated, which gave him great momentum and anger on the part of the priests who dealt with those who were convicted with all cruelty. And packages. The Turin papyrus was not only concerned with the details of that crime, but it is one of the most famous papyri that revealed to us many mysteries about the ancient Egyptian civilization. The Italian traveler, Drovny, obtained it in the early 19th century, and it was said that he found it in Memphis, where it was purchased, and the papyrus was in good condition. Good, except that it was smashed from it and transferred to Italy and placed in the Turin Museum to preserve it, and its importance is that it contains more than 300 names of kings of the pharaohs and the number of years of rule of each of them. He detracts from his royal status, despite the severity of his crime against his father. The papyrus showed the details of the trial, which was considered the first coup against the legitimacy of the king recorded in history, in which many participated, which gave him great momentum and anger on the part of the priests who dealt with those who were convicted with all cruelty. And packages. The Turin papyrus was not only concerned with the details of that crime, but it is one of the most famous papyri that revealed to us many mysteries about the ancient Egyptian civilization. The Italian traveler, Drovny, obtained it in the early 19th century, and it was said that he found it in Memphis, where it was purchased, and the papyrus was in good condition. Good, except that it was smashed from it and transferred to Italy and placed in the Turin Museum to preserve it, and its importance is that it contains more than 300 names of kings. But who is Ramses III, whose reign witnessed this crime, and which many of his leaders, priests, and even his son, the prince, tried to get rid of? Ramses III is considered the most famous ruler of the 20th dynasty, who ruled Egypt for the period 1183 BC. 1152 BCM, historians say that he is considered the last of the great kings in the modern state, and he carried out the same policy that Ramses II followed, and one of his most important actions was the defeat of the Libyans in the western delta, and in the 8th year of his rule, the Sea peoples occupied the north of the country. So Ramses III prepared a campaign and succeeded in defeating them in a naval battle, recorded on the paved walls called Madin at Habu in Thebes. And this indicates his accomplishment in establishing a naval warfare force, as he built warships, placing them at the entrances of the Nile River, and this battle became the first major naval battle in the history of naval battles, and it is also said that the first strike and a sit-in that was recorded in history took place during his reign in the country of Nubia, and perhaps this strike had a hand in the conspirators, as we will come in the details of the plot. The conspiring prince, opinions differed about the identity of this prince. A pseudonym, but the archaeologist, Duke, believes that it is the real name, as the prince took it to be a nickname for him while sitting on the throne. Silly, is likely that the prince who asked himself to kill the king is Ramesses, the owner of the first scene in the procession of princes at the temple of Medinet Habu in Deir el-Bahari, but the archaeologist, Yuyat, has opposed this idea because Prince Ramses, son of Ramesses III from Queen Mysa Taa Hab Jelet, but that Prince Ramesses is the father of Ramesses VI, who was more entitled to the throne than Ramesses IV. But how did that plot to assassinate King Ramses III happen? And did the conspirators succeed in that? Harem conspiracy. Ramses III had several sons from several wives, and it was followed that the king would have one wife, the queen, and her children the right to ascend the throne, in addition to several wives who would have the royal characteristic, but he did not specify among the children of his major royal wives from he will inherit the throne after him, or perhaps he had the intention to nominate his son, Ramses IV, to take over the throne after him, who orchestrated an actual rebellion that almost ended with the assassination of Ramses III. It seems that such a plot could not find a more suitable hotbed for growth than the harem. Queen T or Titi, one of the wives of Ramses III, became convinced that the king would not make her son, Pentor, crown prince, so she resolved to kill him, and then declare her son king. Suare, and Pa Pacamonius. The mission of the latter inside and outside the palace was to deliver the messages of the harem to their mothers and sisters, and it was as follows: arouse the people, incite the enemies to start hostilities against their master. Some officers and palace guards, a priest, and 6 harem women were also involved in the plot and were mediators between the queen and her partners abroad. Before the conspirators struck, they worked to stir up the divisions encamped in the country of Nubia to break the stick of obedience against the king, and to launch a sudden attack on Egypt, and the conspirators were able to win over the chief of the division to their side, because his sister, one of the women of the harem, had stopped him for minutes in this plot. Not only did Trey and her aides gather supporters, but they resorted to magic to seek help in bringing harm and affliction upon the king and his aides, and the details of this plot have been the subject of discussion by many researchers, and there is still no confirmation as to whether this plot has succeeded in eliminating the king. Or did he escape from it to witness the trial of the accused? And the king was described in the documents of this conspiracy as the Great King, which is an epithet given to the deceased king, which prompted some to say that the king had died and that the trial of the conspirators was during the reign of his son, Ramses IV, after he calmed things down, especially in the countries of the Nuba. Queen Trey's plot was exposed, so she, her son, and the rest of the conspirators were brought to trial before a court specially formed for this case, and the king left its judges with absolute power to judge the accused. The court ruled the execution of Pentor and 3 others, and they left them to kill themselves with their own hands, while others were sentenced to imprisonment and amputation of organs. As for the fate of Queen Tree, it is still unknown and no one knows anything about it, because the documents did not record the penalty that the queen received, and it is worth noting that the names of the conspirators were not their real names, but pseudonyms that they had hidden behind, and there is no doubt that this does not help to reveal many of the facts of this conspiracy, and among the penalties that were applied to the conspirators and accomplices among the employees, corporal punishments, such as severing the nose, and saluting the ears, as indicated by the Turin judicial papyrus, as mentioned by each of the legislations of the 2 kings, Horem Moheb and My First City. But the question now is, was King Ramses III assassinated in that plot? The mummy of Ramesses III was studied using a CT scan device by Dr. Ashraf Salim and Dr. Sahar Salim, professors in radiology at Cairo University, and it was revealed and confirmed that King Ramesses III was killed with a sharp knife that caused a slaughter cut in the neck caused by the killer who surprised him from the back. The wound that reached the bones of the neck was recorded, and a careful CT scan confirmed the presence of the Eye of Horus amulet in the chest, as well as the number of 4 amulets representing the 4 sons of Horus. Radiologists confirmed that the presence of the sacrificial wound preceded the embalming operations. Dr. Zahi Hawass explained the special arrangements that were taken when embalming the mummy and placing amulets in their places, which are related to protection, preservation, and securing the king's life in the other world, by saying that embalmers were dealing with the mummy of a king who was treacherously killed. The papyrus indicates that King Ramses III did not die during the conspiracy, and Dr. Zahi Hawass says that it did not happen in ancient Egyptian history, that it explicitly referred to the killing of the king, but it was said that his soul ascended to heaven, just as the king's death was referred to as a state of grief that afflicts him. Palace men. Hawass adds that the amulets that were placed in the body of Ramesses III were intended to heal the wounds of the conspiracy and to ensure a better life in the other world. The Egyptian team recently studied the DNA of the mummy of an unknown young man in the Egyptian Museum under the supervision of Dr. Yehya Gad and Dr. Sumaya Ismail, and it was found inside the cache of mummies, where it was confirmed through the study that the mummy was linked to the son's relationship to the father or vice versa with the mummy of King Ramesses III. And because King Ramesses III reached the age of 60 when he was killed. Therefore, the medical team for the study of royal mummies announced that the DNA analysis of the blatant mummy proved that he belonged to a first-degree relative of King Ramses III and that he was his son or, at the weakest possibility, his brother, and the textual evidence says that the criminal was young and was punished by killing himself. And the agreement of the textual evidence with the archaeological evidence and the medical results, it can be said that the blatant mummy is of Prince Pentor, the son of King Ramesses III from his wife Even, and he is the perpetrator of the assassination of King Ramesses III around 1184 to 1153 BC. This is the most famous conspiracy in ancient history and the evidence of the identity of the screaming mummy.